The call came on a Thursday morning, and I almost didn't pick up. I was in the middle of signing papers at the kitchen table, the same table where my late wife used to sit with her crossword puzzles and her third cup of decaf, when my phone lit up with my son's name. I figured he was calling to ask about the weekend, maybe to check in the way he does sometimes, just to make sure his old man hasn't fallen down the stairs. I set my pen down and answered. He didn't say hello. He said, "Dad, don't deposit that money. I need you to stop everything and meet me." I told him I was in the middle of something. He said, "I know. That's why I'm calling." My son is 34 years old. He's a civil engineer. He is not a dramatic person. He doesn't call me out of nowhere on Thursday mornings to be theatrical. So when his voice came through the phone sounding the way it did, tight, careful, like he was choosing every single word, I put my pen down flat on the table and I listened. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "Home," I said, finalizing the account transfer with Diane. There was a pause. "Is she there with you?" "In the living room." Another pause, longer this time. "Can you step outside?" "Just for a minute. Tell her you need some air." I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working in insurance risk assessment. I have reviewed thousands of claims, interviewed hundreds of people, and trained myself to notice when something doesn't add up. I like to think I am not a man who is easily rattled. I was rattled. I told Diane I needed to check the mail. I walked out the front door of my house in Raleigh, North Carolina in my socks, and I stood on the porch in 40-degree weather, and I said, "Okay, talk." What my son told me in the next 4 minutes changed everything I thought I understood about the previous 8 months of my life. I should back up. My wife, Carol, my first wife, my only wife until recently, passed away 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer. It was fast. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We had 30 years together, a house we loved, 2 grown kids, and a plan for retirement that involved a camper van and the Pacific Coast Highway. None of that happened. Instead, I spent the first year after her death sitting in a house that smelled like her shampoo, watching television I can't remember, and eating frozen dinners that her sister kept dropping off because nobody knew what else to do. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm just telling you where I was. The second year, I started getting out more. I joined a hiking group at the community center. My daughter had pushed me to do it for months, said it would be good for me to be around people. She was right. It was good. I started sleeping better. I started cooking again. Small things, but they added up. That's where I met Diane. She was in the hiking group. 61, recently retired from pharmaceutical sales, lived alone in a condo across town. She was funny. She was sharp. She laughed at my terrible jokes, which my kids will tell you is either a miracle or a red flag, depending on who you ask. We started getting coffee after the hikes, then dinner. By October, we were spending most weekends together. I want to be very clear about something. I was not naive about what I was doing. I was not a lonely old man stumbling into something he didn't understand. I was a widower in his 60s who was cautiously, deliberately allowing himself to feel something again. I was careful. I thought I was being careful. By the following spring, Diane had suggested something that made sense to me at the time. Pooling resources for a joint investment property. She had a connection, she said, through a former colleague. A vacation rental in Asheville. The numbers were good. The plan was to buy in together, split the rental income, and sell in a few years at a profit. She had done something similar before, she said. She knew how it worked. I liked the idea. It felt practical. It felt like something Carol and I might have done together. Actually, we'd always talked about investment property. It felt like the next chapter. I transferred $50,000 into a shared account we'd opened together. I was about to transfer the second portion, another 30, when the phone rang. My son met me at a diner about 10 minutes from the house. He was already there when I pulled in, sitting in a corner booth with his laptop open and a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. He looked like he hadn't slept. I sat down across from him and said, "Whatever this is, just tell me straight." He turned the laptop to face me. "I've been looking into her," he said. "I'm sorry. I know you're going to be angry." Something felt off to me from the beginning, and I didn't know how to say it. And then, when you told me about the investment account last month, I couldn't let it go. I looked at the screen. He had pulled up public court records. A civil judgment from Mecklenburg County dated 7 years ago. The name of the plaintiff was different, but the name of the defendant was Diane's. The judgment was for fraudulent misrepresentation in a real estate transaction. $62,000. I kept looking. There was a second document. A complaint filed in Guilford County, Same defendant. Different name on the plaintiff's side. This one had been settled, which meant the terms were sealed, but the nature of the filing was listed. Financial fraud, elder exploitation. I sat back in the booth. My son said, "Dad." I said, "Keep going." He had found 3 different names she had used across various documents over the past decade. One matched the name on a complaint filed with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Her license had been suspended, then permanently revoked, for misrepresentation and misappropriation of client funds. She had been licensed in her own name, then it appeared she'd been operating under variations, a middle name, a married name from a previous marriage. The Asheville property my son had looked up. It didn't exist. The address she'd given me corresponded to a commercial laundry facility. I stared at the screen for a long time. I said, "How long have you known this?" He said, "I found the first judgment 3 weeks ago. I've been building the rest since then. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. I didn't want to be wrong." I said, "You should have told me sooner." He said, "I know." We looked at each other across that diner table, my son, who had spent 3 weeks sitting on information that must have terrified him, deciding how to tell his father without destroying something his father needed, and I felt something complicated move through me. Pride and grief and a particular kind of shame that I don't have a clean word for. I said, "The 50,000. He said, "I don't know yet. That's going to depend on how fast we move." I drove home. Diane was still there. She was in the kitchen making tea. She looked up when I came in and smiled, and I stood in the doorway and looked at her. This woman I had let into my life, into my home, into the chair at my kitchen table where my wife used to sit, and I thought, "How long have you been practicing that smile?" I kept my voice level. 31 years in insurance taught me that much. I said I needed to make a few calls about the transfer. Some issue with the routing number. Nothing to worry about. She said, "Of course, take your time," and went back to her tea. I went upstairs and I called my attorney. My attorney's name is a matter my son had already taken care of. He'd called her before me, explained the situation, told her I would be calling. She was ready. She walked me through what to do. Don't confront Diane yet. Document everything. Call the bank immediately to flag the existing shared account and stop any pending transactions. File a report with the NC Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. And if possible, if I could manage it, get her to say something on record. That last part, my attorney explained, was the part that would matter most. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm not ashamed of it either. I went back downstairs. I sat across from Diane at the kitchen table. I told her I'd sorted out the routing issue and I was ready to do the second transfer. I asked her to walk me through the account information one more time, just to confirm. She did. My phone was propped against the fruit bowl on the table. "Recording," I said, "and the property address again?" "I just want to make sure I have it in my notes." She gave me the addresses, the same address. The commercial laundry facility in Asheville. I said, "And your colleague, the one with the contact on this property, remind me of his name?" She gave me a name. I said, "Great. I'll have my attorney confirm the paperwork on Monday and we can finalize everything then." She said that sounded perfect. Then I drove her to her car. She'd parked down the street because there was a leaf blower truck blocking my driveway when she arrived. And I watched her pull away, and I sat in my truck for 15 minutes with the engine running, not going anywhere. Over the next 72 hours, my son and I did not sleep much. We filed the AG complaint. We filed a report with the Raleigh Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. My attorney submitted the recording along with my son's documentation to the investigating detective. We contacted the bank, froze the joint account, and initiated a recovery claim for the $50,000. The detective told us that this kind of case was more common than most people realized, and more difficult to prosecute than most people assumed. The joint account complicated things because I had signed the transfer voluntarily. But the recording, combined with the false property address, combined with the prior judgment and the revoked license, that was enough to open a formal investigation. I also called the hiking group coordinator. Quietly. I didn't want to make a scene. I just said that I had some concerns about one of the newer members, and that it might be worth the organization being aware, and that I could provide details if they wanted them. The coordinator called me back the next day. Apparently I was not the first person to raise a concern. That part, I'll be honest, hit me harder than I expected, because it meant she had been doing this, running some version of this, among people who were vulnerable. People in grief, people in transition, People like me who were just trying to figure out what comes next. And she had been doing it right there, in a hiking group at a community center, which is exactly the kind of place you go when you're trying to trust the world again. I sat with that for a while. My daughter flew in from Minneapolis the weekend after everything came out. She didn't ask. She just booked the flight and showed up, and she spent the whole weekend at my house, sleeping in her old room, making soup from a recipe her mother used to make, not pushing me to talk about anything until I was ready. We talked on Sunday evening. It was late. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug, and I was across from her, and she said, "Are you angry at yourself?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Don't be. Or be angry. That's fine. But not at yourself." I said, "I should have known." She said, "You had no reason to know." That's how these things work, Dad. She was good at it because she'd done it before. You were good at your job for 30 years and she still fooled you. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes her practiced. I thought about that. She said, "I'm just glad you picked up the phone." I said, "Your brother called at exactly the right time." She said, "I know. I told him to." I looked at her. She said, "I'd been worried for a while. But you seemed so happy, and I didn't want to take that away from you if I was wrong. So I asked him to look into it because I figured you'd take it better from him." I didn't know what to say. My daughter, who had spent months watching her father fall for someone, quietly deciding that the right thing to do was to find out the truth before saying a word. My son, who had spent 3 weeks sitting on records that must have scared him, building a case so thorough that when he brought it to me I couldn't argue with a single piece of it. I said, "You two did all of this for me." My daughter said, "That's what we do." It took 8 months for the investigation to fully close. The detective who handled the case told me at one point that financial exploitation of this kind, targeting people in grief, in transition, in the early stages of something new, is extraordinarily underreported because the victims are ashamed. They don't want to say it out loud. They don't want to be the cautionary tale. I'm saying it out loud. I got $61,000 back. Not the full 50 I had transferred, but close. The recovery came through a combination of the bank's fraud protection claim and a civil judgment against her that my attorney pursued alongside the criminal case. She was charged with 2 counts of financial fraud and 1 count of elder exploitation. I don't know the final sentencing because my attorney advised me not to follow it too closely for my own sake, and I took that advice. What I know is this: the shared account is closed. The investment property that never existed is gone from my paperwork. And the kitchen table, where I sat across from a woman I thought I was building something with. I still sit at that table every morning. It's just a table. Carol would have agreed with me on that. The hiking group reorganized their membership intake process. I heard they now do a brief background check for anyone who joins through an outside referral. I don't know if that's directly because of what happened with me. I'd like to think it helped someone else. My son drove down from Charlotte the month after everything was settled. We went to a baseball game, the kind of ordinary father-son thing we hadn't done in a while, and on the way home he said, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." I said, "You told me exactly when you needed to." He said, "I was scared you'd be angry." I said, "I was angry, but not at you. Not for a single minute." He nodded and looked out the window. I said, "I'm proud of you, the way you handled it, the thoroughness, the patience." He said, "I learned that from watching you work." I didn't say anything to that, I just drove. I want to say something to whoever is listening to this right now. Not about protecting your finances, though that matters. Not about red flags to watch for, though those matter too. I want to say something about the people around you. The ones who notice things you can't see because you're too close. The ones who stay quiet for a while because they love you and they don't want to hurt you, and then make the call when the time comes. My son called me on a Thursday morning and started a sentence with "don't. Don't deposit that money." And I almost didn't pick up. My daughter quietly coordinated the whole thing from 1,000 miles away because she trusted her instincts and she trusted her brother. And she trusted that love sometimes means saying the hard thing at exactly the right time. I spent 8 months believing I had found something good. Maybe I had, in a way, not in Diane, but in what the whole terrible experience showed me about my kids. About the kind of people they are. About what they would do when something they loved was at risk. I got played. I lost time and money and some of my confidence in my own judgment. Those things are real, and I don't pretend otherwise. But I have a son who sat up 3 weeks' worth of nights, pulling court records for me. I have a daughter who bought a last-minute flight and made her mother's soup and sat with me at the kitchen table on a Sunday night and waited until I was ready. I have people who would make the call. That, I've decided, is more than enough. That is, if you want to know what I think, the whole thing. That is what you're building when you build a life. Not the investment property, not the retirement account, not the plan that's supposed to make everything okay. You're building the people who will call you on a Thursday morning and start a sentence with "don't." If you have those people, hold on to them. And if you are those people for someone, don't wait. Make the call.